What deep, dark secret did you learn about the seemingly perfect family? Noah, brother and sister, lived together in a huge mansion and both own amazing beautiful cars. Clearly very affluent. One of them began dating a family friend who wasn't so well off. Turns out the reason they're so rich is because their parents were associated with some Italian mafia and were brutally murdered and ARPed in front of them when they were children. They were given a huge inheritance after this event. You would never guess. They look like they've had the easiest life. Edit. Since everyone's asking. The mother was ARPed. Then murdered while her husband watched. Then the husband was murdered. Poor choice of syntax. My bad. Well, it is better to cry in a brand new Mercedes than on a shitty old bike. I worked at an Amazon store. The owner of the place hired this kid whose parents went to his church. The day he was supposed to start, the whole family shows up. Mom, dad, son. They all start working. The guy was too spineless to let them go, so they all got hired. They were pretty much bottom of the barrel workers and just kind of kept themselves aside from pleasantries. We were kind of a rowdy bunch and they didn't fit in. And also 3 of them did the work of 1 person. My co-worker started referring to them as the Dahmer family because the father resembled Jeffrey Dahmer and they were all a little bit too idyllic and Christian. And it started to get weird. The son regularly called out, citing stomach issues and saying certain tasks made his legs tired and things like that. Mr. Dahmer started having these intense fits of rage where he would go off on us for minor things. Ms. Dahmer started to become strangely attached to me and regularly bought me strange gifts like holistic headache creams, a neti pot, organic tea, etc. Years later I find out that the son had AIDS. The mother and the son were a little too close for that age. The father eventually got caught doing some strange things and they got a divorce. Miss Dahmer, on my last week working there, started asking me about demons and things. On my last day she gave me this manila envelope that had this 30-page manifesto she written as a letter to me about how she was infested with demons and all kinds of crazy Song of Solomon type things. She thought I was infested with demons too. But hey, I still have that neti pot. They kept their handicapped son locked up. Most people didn't even know he existed. They made his room like a padded cell and just left him in bed all the time with a nurse coming to bathe, feed and rotate him. His parents didn't even talk to him or look at him often. People dealt with things badly in the past. I had a close friend at school whose brother had Downs but we didn't know because he was sent to a home early in life and never saw him. It all came out one day when one of us dropped by at the time of his annual home visit. She had been forbidden to mention her brother even in front of her parents. My grandpa on my mom's side had another family on the side. When he died my grandmother's name was put on his gravestone. The other family chiseled it out. Also my oldest aunt on my mom's side isn't blood related. Didn't learn that until I was 23. How is it determined who is the main family and who is the side family? Does it just boil down to who was there first? Does it matter if one family knows about the other but not the reverse? I have so many questions. Of course our side of the family says we were the main family. But that's because he was married to my grandma first. Not sure how the other family found out. My grandma found out after rumors started spreading and she confronted him. The other family was from another town. This was in the 60s and grandma was an immigrant housewife. So she didn't have too many options but stay with him, so it's not spoke too much of. Grandpa died when my grandma was pregnant with my mom. Throwaway time. My grandmother is directly related to Kim Il-sung. She performed as a kindergartner in front of him. Her family ran away to South Korea when the war began. And she grew up relatively poor. My parents were in a cult for years that worshipped chaos magic. When I was in the hospital recovering from pneumonia, I hallucinated for 2 weeks. I don't remember the first few days of it. But a friend swears that he came to visit me and I was babbling on about different kinds of magic and one of them was chaos magic. An ex-fiance also told me that not only do I snore in my sleep, but I do this spooking mumbling thing where it sounds like I'm trying to cast spells. I'm kind of annoyed that I can't fully access my magical powers. My father was a pastor who cheated on his wife, my mother, while she was undergoing chemotherapy. So there's that. Edit. Just to be clear, he was very manipulative and abusive behind closed doors, so that's why we were a seemingly perfect family. We don't have any relationship with him anymore and we intend to keep it that way. Pretty sure he's homeless now and I heavily disagree with you if you think there's any justification for abandoning the person who needs you the most when they're at their weakest and lowest point. Kindly duck off if you wanna convince me what he did wasn't that bad. Because you weren't there. And please don't recommend any Eminem song to me. I'm never gonna listen to it. I have yet to prove that the family next door is in witness protection or a spy family. I'm on to you, John. That they were actually perfect. Honestly, I've learned a lot of deep, dark secrets about a lot of families. What freaked me out the most was learning that an actual Leave It to Beaver type family could exist. Took me years to learn how to deal with it. She was sleeping with his brother. At 60 she divorced him and married the brother. The most shocking part is that all three eventually ended up back on friendly terms and were invited to the next 3 weddings of the husband. The wife and brother did not live to see the 4th. Close bracket. When I was a kid I knew a set of twins who were friends with my older sister. The twins, both female, straight A students and always dressed modestly. Neither girl was allowed to date and their parents owned a huge house with multiple cars and the girls never seemed to want for anything. Anyway, a few years later the parents were busted because apparently they owned another house a few streets away. Less lavish, and they were running a brothel out of it with girls the same age as their daughters, who were around 18 at this time and both in university. I just found it very ironic that they were so protective over their own daughters but were whoring out other people's daughters. On my mother's side I have an aunt who decided to steal money from a charity to rebuild a guy's house that recently burned down. It was a small town so all they had was a bin for dollar bills at the local bar. She took all of it and the next day had some expensive new shoes. And on my dad's side my grandfather was some weasel face con man who cheated at church, celebrities, and politicians so he could live without working. But one day he and one of the largest sport memorabilia collections on earth disappeared. He apparently was killed in a mob hit. I have a cousin out there that my whole family has never met. My grandparents were the nicest people but apparently my aunt got pregnant as a teen and they sent her away to have the baby and give up for adoption. I believe this would have been sometime in the 60s or even late 50s given her age. One of my parents told me this a while ago once and I've never heard anyone in my whole family ever mention anything about it other than that one time. Family whose parents were popular and well liked in the area back when they were in high school. Their daughters were all popular and well liked as well in high school. They were all the type of people that had no strong opinions and did not care to argue. Just kinda positive people. People automatically were kind of drawn to them and for that everyone in town likes them. They have some ownership in a local dealership too and their girls are on a lot of the commercials. One day, one of their daughters, same grade as me back in high school, let it slip to me that she found a hidden camera in the pool changing room at their pool house. She said it in kind of a oh yeah, haha shrug found a camera. My dad is so silly. It kind of seems like she was assuming he put it there to catch them drinking. But she realizes that it was probably more than that but she just figures boys will be boys type thing. The dad looks like the creepiest mother ducker ever and he has been likely videotaping not only his daughters, but all of their female friends which is like nearly all of the popular high school women in my town. I have a very small family of about 7 people. Growing up everyone would get together for events and everything seemed pretty normal and everyone seemed to get along. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I noticed that everyone in my family actually hates the shit out of each other, and it was just some huge contest to see who had become the better person over the years. My mother and my grandmother are the only ones who talk to each other. And it's probably only because they live together. My grandmother and grandfather are separated. And my grandmother only calls him every few months to see if he's dead or not. It's not the worst secret ever. But my mother still keeps in touch with her first boyfriend. The family of her ex are a perfect family from an outsider's view. And I have assumed this to be true for the last 35 years. They are also polite and welcoming. I recently learned that the woman my mother's ex married beat the children until they were 18. And that the two daughters hate each other. When the daughters are out socially, they put on the front of a perfect family unit and pretend to get on well. Not that shocking. But crazy if you know them and how well they present in public. Perfect kids. Perfect husband and wife. Respected members of the community, as the dad was a doctor. Partnered with another similarly respected doctor in the town. A few years later, a polite notice appeared in the newspaper that they were ending their partnership. Nobody batted an eyelid. Things continued as normal. Fast forward about 20 years later. And I find one of the daughters on Facebook. We went to school together and I happened to be a patient of the dad, so I asked how he was doing. Dad is estranged from the family. That practice they partnered with? He was having an affair with the wife and they ran off. That's why they ended it. But to save face, they just made it seem like a professional split and he retired. Very few people know the true story. Not something that plagues the family, but I have an ancestor that was mutilated on the high seas. There are the ones about my family I've told before. We aren't perfect. But things like attempted axe murdering grandfather are pretty crazy secrets. But as a kid I hung out with a dude who was part of a perfect family, it seemed. His mom was an Olympic rower and his dad was some super cool business exec. We were good friends from like 12-14 or so. Then different school. I found out his mom died of cancer like the year later. Was very sad. Then the next year, it came to light the dad was sexually abusing him and his two little sisters. And had been maybe forever. He went to jail for that. It was one of those floor falling out of the world things. Poor guy. Not necessarily dark. But before going to college, I was told that I had an uncle that I had never met. My grandfather cheated on my grandma with his secretary. And ended up getting her pregnant. She caught him when going through his bank statements. And noticed that he was paying child support to a woman that she had never heard of. Originally. My parents weren't supposed to tell us until my grandma passed away. She was too embarrassed and hurt by my grandfather's infidelity for us to know that we had an uncle. When my mom told me about him, I was able to determine his age. And his middle name. It turned out he was only 2 years older than me. And still lived in the same county as where he was born. I spent 6 months scouring Facebook. And sending strangers messages about unknown family members. Eventually, I was able to find him. When I did find him, it turned out he was struggling with DRG and alcohol addiction. I told him I wouldn't bring him home to meet his brothers, nieces, nephews, etc. until he was clean and sober for a year. And that if he tried to reach out before that, I would make sure he had no contact with our family moving forward. It was a hard thing to tell someone at 19 years old. But he took it seriously and got clean. A year later, I brought him home to meet his brother, my dad. For the first time. It was weird. I met my friend's grandparents and they are your typical kind of white doily toting American grandparents. They literally have the cutest old people house in the world and they're extremely friendly. Turns out for a time in the 60s or 70s they were in a sex cult. It's an open secret that my friend's uncle is actually the child of the grandmother and the cult leader. My grandpa knew and grew up with Joseph Mengele. My grandma still denies the experiments that happened in Auschwitz, not the killing, but rather Mengele's role in Auschwitz. Just to note, my grandpa said that he didn't like Mengele, even as kids. He was self-centered and ruthless. This isn't my family, but I absolutely have to share this. The only reason I am is it's been about 2 years since they discovered, and are more comfortable joking about it now. I never asked about the aftermath. I know 2 girls who are sisters who had their family issues and whatever, but were happy with each other for the most part. Their dad always went on business trips and he wasn't home a lot. It did seem kind of suspicious because he was a chef, I think. Or he made recipes for a kitchen. Something weird where it didn't really warrant business trips. But I don't think they really thought anything of it. It turns out the sister's family is actually his second family. And the other family had 2 brothers who were both older than the sisters. He had put 3/4 of the kids through college and the 4th was currently in school. They found out because the other mother of the other family was digging on Facebook one day and found a picture of their dad and the girl's mom. She sent the sister's mom a death threat. And they pieced it together from there. It wasn't even my family. But I was absolutely floored by this. My friends seem to have the perfect marriage and a newborn to take care of. Both parents are very involved and loving. The husband confessed to me that right before their son was born. His wife came out as a lesbian to him and confessed that she was in love with her best female friend. However, because their family is religious and would never accept her, she agreed to stay married to him and keep up appearances for the sake of their child. They barely talk in private, but in public they are the perfect loving young family. Given that I was pretty young at the time, I probably missed some warning signs. A good friend of mine was being pretty seriously abused by his mother and I had no idea. He was the class clown and always seemed happy. We would hang out at each other's houses after school and play on the weekends. I never had a weird experience with his mother. Years later, he stabbed his mother to death in her sleep. Lived in Georgia for about a year while my dad was stationed in Fort Benning. Started freshman year of high school and met a really cool girl that I maintained a pretty good friendship with. She was an only child, and her parents were some of the most devout Catholics I'd ever met. Even my dad, raised Catholic and maintained his faith through his adulthood. Didn't really compare. Pretty normal family setting for them. But I moved away after a year because dad retired from the army. Closer towards when I left, I went over to visit and walked into the front door to see her mom getting spit roasted in the middle of their living room. Her husband wasn't even home. They all have DUIs. Literally. Mom, dad, 3 daughters, and son. All have DUIs. A couple of them have more than 3+. I dated the middle daughter for many years and they always made me feel lesser for being in the military and not going to college right away. Always had a holier than thou attitude. Then I had to pick up a brother from jail from his second DUI in 5 years and learned of the family history. He didn't seem to think a second DUI was an issue and went on to tell me about each one his family members had. I was stunned. Breaking up with her sucked. But I was relieved to be away from that family. My grandfather lives in Tennessee by himself, kind of out in the mountains. Well, there is a family cemetery in his backyard up this 50-yard long hill that's covered in thick trees. There's a dude in our family buried up there along with his 9 dead children and 4 dead wives who all died at pretty young ages. All of the women he married died around 3-5 years after they got married. This was back in the mid to late 1800s and I guess the guy was known to be real shady. Still unknown if he played a part in all the deaths or if he is just a super unlucky man. The quiet housewife of the farm family on our rural island near Seattle was actually an undercover FBI agent. My buddy, one of her sons, revealed this to me 60 years later. Everybody knew everybody's business in that small community. But this one evidently fell through the cracks. A soccer coach of mine from elementary school had a cute blonde daughter who was also on the team. A lovely little baby. And he made enough as a car salesman so his wife didn't have to work. One thing I remember was that he once overinflated the soccer ball because he thought our team could trap and dribble better. Seemed pretty innocent at the time. But I thought of this years later when there was a story in the paper about how he was going to prison for embezzling 50k from the soccer league.